I have so appreciated this season of Lent, so that we might linger for a while in the passion of Jesus. So often we take the passion of Jesus and one fell swoop, either on Holy Thursday or Good Friday, and if you don't come to either of those services, we do it very quickly. And I appreciated the time to just linger. Last week it was Judas. It was Judas betraying Jesus. This week it's Jesus in the garden. Next week it will be Peter and his denial of even knowing Jesus, allowing us time to truly embrace the passion. This morning we go to the garden with Jesus as he prays. A recent Gallup poll said that about 70% of those who profess themselves to be Christian pray on a regular basis. But when something goes wrong in their lives, that jumps to 90% that pray. The question this morning I'd like to entertain for just a few moments is not whether we should or should not pray, but rather, does prayer make a difference? Does prayer make any difference in our lives? Is prayer a power or a placebo? Is prayer wishful thinking? Or is it a divine intervention? I want to take a look just for a moment to see what might be possible. What is possible in prayer as we look at Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane contemplating his mortality and impending death? And the first thing that jumped out to me in my study this week, as he shares these words, "My Father, if it's possible, take this cup of suffering away from me." The first thing that jumped out to me is that prayer is first and foremost about relationship. Prayer is not so much a religious activity as it is a personal relationship with our Creator. We often fall into the trap of thinking what we call the Lord's Prayer as the only recorded prayer of Jesus. That is simply not true. However, in the garden, we see him turning to his Father intimately, deeply, humanly, and painfully. In case you didn't know, Major League Baseball started this week. So I said to myself, "Self, you got to have a baseball illustration somewhere in your sermon to connect the dots." There's been a lot of legends, lots of stories. Former Yankee catcher Yogi Berra, and I thought I'd lay one on you this morning. The legend goes, I don't know if it actually happened or not, but the legend goes that Yogi was playing in a game, bottom of the ninth, at Yankee Stadium. There were 2 outs. It was on the top of the ninth at Yankee Stadium. There were 2 outs, and Yogi was behind the plate. The batter comes up, gets in the batter's box, gets ready. Before he takes his stance, he takes the bat, and he makes the sign of the cross on the plate. Batter gets in the batter's box. Yogi Berra stands up, calls timeout, goes over the plate, sees the cross, and wipes it off. Wipes it off. And he turns to the batter and says, "Why don't we just let God watch the game from the stands?" I share that because that might be good advice for baseball, but terrible advice for life. God desires relationship with the created. God creates the created, not to sit in the stands, not to just watch. but rather to live in their hearts and sustain them. We often treat prayer as negotiation, bartering, arbitration agreement, but among equal partners. I came across this quote in my study, and I'd like to share it with you. Prayer is not acquisition from God, but rather intimacy with God. Let me repeat that. Prayer is not acquisition from God. Hey, God, if you could see yourself straight, send a little of that my way. But rather, it's personal relationship. It's intimacy with the God that is already within us. It is a moment in time to connect with the one who knew us before birth, who formed us in the womb, and who sustains our every breath. Now for me, I don't know what it is for you. Maybe you do. I hope you do. I hope you find out what it is. But for me, this is most often done in the gift of silence and just merely listening. This relationship strengthens when one embraces their weaknesses in light of God's power. Even Jesus turns to God in his vulnerability, in his agony, seeking God's intercession. I began to think, maybe, just maybe, that's why the Serenity Prayer means so much to so many. Because it deals with embracing our weaknesses and God's power. You know the words? God, Father, grant me the serenity, the peace to accept the things I cannot change. Courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That is a prayer of relationship. But Jesus' prayer in the garden doesn't stop there. He then continues by saying, not what I want, but what you want. You see, Jesus' prayer, Jesus' model is first about relationship, but then it ends with, thy will be done. Sound familiar? Thy will be done. And here's the duality of life, the duality of our faith. On one hand, we have this mystery of God. On the other hand, we have the revelation of this God's will. Now, I've said many times that I marvel in the mystery of God. I marvel in it, I breathe in it, I learn in it, I question it, and I live it out in my often futile faith. However, in this mystery, in these things we don't know, lies the revelation of God's will in our lives. See both? The mystery, but also the revelation of God's will. For example, I believe it is God's will that all would seek salvation and new life. It is God's will that God's kingdom will come on earth. It is God's will that good will overcome evil. It is God's will that justice roll down like waters. It is God's will that we love our neighbors as we love ourselves. It is God's will that we respond to the cry of the needy, forsaken, outcast, and lost. Always seeking the will of God, my dear friends, simply pleases God. There's no mystery there. If we seek the will of God, we will please God. We do that in the surrendering of our agendas, our rightness, our judgment, our authority. We please God by seeking the very will of God. Because in this surrender, by just saying, God, it's your will, it comes full circle. That drives us to a deeper relationship with God. It's circular. We want to relationship with God. And as we seek this relationship, we seek God's will and want to do what's pleasing unto Him, that strengthens our relationship. And it goes around and around, and it expands and it evolves and it goes deeper until we see in death Jesus' final prayer from the cross. Do you remember it? Just prior to His death, the final prayer of Jesus was, Father, relationship, into your hands I commend my spirit. Surrender to the will of God. And I got to thinking, what would happen in our life? For Jesus, it happened in death, or just prior to it. What would happen in our life if our prayer was just that? Always and forever. Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. I commend my will. I commend my life. I commend unto you what you created us to be. I end with what I hope will be a blessing to you. As you leave, I didn't tell the ushers this. Hey, ushers, they'll be at the door. My ushers will be at the door. And if you would like what I'm about to read, it's what I'm calling our Lenten 2019 prayer. It's a prayer card. It's on cardstock. It's a sturdy thing. And if this speaks to you in any way, I would invite you to take one. Take a few if you need to. And keep it with you throughout the entirety of our Lent together. And I'd ask that you refer to this many times during the day. Take a moment and just read it through. And see which part of this prayer speaks to you in that moment, that maybe you're at your desk at work, or you're out playing with the kids, or you're on your way somewhere. And don't read it while you're driving. But see if this might speak to you. That it might touch your spirit regarding your relationship that leads to surrendering to the very will of God. If you'd like to read this silently with me, it'll be on our PowerPoint screens, our worship screens, or outwardly. It's up to you. Let's see where the Spirit takes us here. The will of God will never take you where the grace of God cannot keep you, where the arms of God cannot support you, where the riches of God cannot supply your needs, where the power of God cannot endow you. The will of God will never take you where the Spirit of God cannot work through you, where the wisdom of God cannot teach you, where the army of God cannot protect you, where the hands of God cannot mold you. The will of God will never take you where the love of God cannot enfold you, where the mercies of God cannot sustain you, where the peace of God cannot calm your fears, where the authority of God cannot overrule for you. The will of God will never take you where the comfort of God cannot dry your tears, where the word of God cannot feed you, where the miracles of God cannot be done for you, where the omnipresence of God cannot find you. Friends, that's grace. That's just grace alone. A grace that desires relationship, that surrenders unto the will of God, that deepens relationship. For grace alone. Let's stand and sing.